Watch The Toxic Avenger now on Screambox. The radioactive superhero that's certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes is available to watch now from the comfort of your home. Bloody FM listeners get a special introductory offer by going to bit.ly/ToxyFM. That's bit.ly/ToxieFM for a special offer on Screambox.
Sometimes you gotta do something.
Welcome to Horror Bytes on Safe Room, a show where we discuss the smaller scares and teenier terrors available to play on your gaming devices. From 5-minute prototypes to tantalizing demos and ambitious small-scale games, Horror Bytes aims to celebrate all kinds of terrifying micro-monsters in the indie horror gaming space, with 2 games in each episode picked for a particular theme. I am your host, Neil Bolt, and joining me in this endeavor as ever is Jay Krieger. How are you doing, Jay?
I'm good, man. I'm extra wet this week, and that's a horrible way to begin a podcast, but you know what I'm getting at here.
Yes, I think we're in the wrong category for that kind of thing. But yes, we are kicking off a new theme on this episode where I am honouring aquatic horror with what I like to call Sometimes Dead is Wetter. So we must select small horror games, concepts, game jams and the like that have something to do with the water, be it the horrors of the briny deep or a creep at the local swimming pool. Anything like that, it all flies. So Jay is kicking us off by sifting through the silt to bring us Water Womb World. Jay, tell us more about this.
Yeah, so this is a game from a developer who we covered way back in the day, developer Yames Games. And we had covered their previous sort of point-and-click adventure horror game called Growing My Grandpa, which was this body horror game that dealt with like this parasitic entity and at the same time like family lineage. And it was a really sort of like lo-fi and an early example of, us delving more into these like very much lesser known games that just have this kind of like scuzzy feel to them. And that was, according to when that game was released, that was like 3 years ago that game came out, which, a lot of the developers that we cover, you see more frequent releases from them. So I kind of like had that game in my, wish list for a while. And then I was like anxiously awaiting the next game and we finally got it. And, lucky us, it blends 2 of our most beloved sort of like aspects of indie games, which is in one case, aquatic horror. In the other side of things, it is, again, like very much capturing that sort of like grungy, weird aesthetic that you only get from these types of games that, they're not made for the masses, so to speak. And as we've talked about many a times, that often yields games that are very much sort of like made for us in a lab, as we like to say. Like it feels unapologetic in just how weird it is in the direction that they take, whether it's storytelling, presentation, what have you. And Water Womb World, like say that 5 times fast, is yet another really terrific example of that. So this game blends, man's need for exploration, but also for understanding where man came from and sort of like the intersection of science and religion. As you play this scientist that also is a person of faith, and they find themselves in this deep sea submersible that has like basically a mobile lab for them. And as you said in the intro, they're sifting through the silt and trying to find not only sort of like relics from the past or fossils, but also catching wildlife that's down in this darkest depths of the sea to basically attempt to find answers to how humanity created, right, and civilization. But also challenging the notion of like, is there a God or is there not? And if there is, what does that deity kind of like look like and why did they create us perhaps? I'll say that like right off the bat, I think again, like Yames is a developer that has a very specific approach to world building and is like very direct. This is also, the format is like a dungeon crawler basically. So you go from your submersible, you go out into the ocean and you kind of have to like click forwards and basically maneuver the way you would in a classic dungeon crawler to find fish, but also to basically just find new patches of silt. And, I will say right off the bat, like playing this game is not what I think makes it a really remarkable experience, because of the fact that it is quite rudimentary, right? It's kind of, when you're trying to find a fish, it's a little frustrating because when they pop up in front of you, they'll very quickly disappear if you don't immediately cast your net. So that resulted in a couple of instances where I was kind of like scrambling basically with this very slow, archaic movement style. And then on top of that, when you want to find basically the relics from the past, you don't really have a sense of direction other than I'm just going to like keep going in one direction until it stops me. And you can back out to get to your basically submersible, and you literally just click like back a bunch of times until it gives you the option again to do that. So, playing this game is not exactly as intuitive as I would have liked. However, I think that again, like, it comes down to the presentation, because the writing here is quite effective in setting the mood, because of the fact that, again, you have that intersection of faith and science and someone that is further falling down sort of like the rabbit hole of discovery, in a way that's not only changing their understanding of sort of their understanding of the world and of humanity, but also it's quite literally changing them in ways that are best left for the player to uncover on their own. So like, this is a game that I think took me 20 minutes to play the first time, and took me half an hour to play the second time, because of the fact that it has a developer commentary, which is really well worth checking out. And I can't think of any other game I've played that has a developer commentary, unless it was something that like Valve did. So for an indie horror developer that I'm quite fond of, and I'm pretty sure I remember you liking Growing My Grandpa, like, it was great to be able to actually hear from this developer, like, their thought process into not only the like meat and bones of developing this game's mechanics, but also what went into developing some of the denizens of the deep that the player will encounter the further they get into their own investigation. But what did you think of Water Womb World?
I mean, I like that it is quite this deliberately clunky, rudimentary thing. It works very well for it. It's the routine of it, the basicness. Again, like you said, the story is the thing that you're here for in a lot of ways, though, and that's very important here in terms of it gives a little bit of doubt to it in a way, in the same way that you would say, like, in Rose Glass's Saint Maud, that film, where it's about religious feeling and what you believe is happening and what you believe in. But could you question what that is from the outside? I mean, someone underwater in a submersible who's gone really deep into this theory of aqua Catholicism, as they put it. Could it just be that the pressures of the deep and everything are just kind of sending them a bit doolally, and they're seeing stuff like that you could interpret it that way a lot of way, and I like that about it. That which I think the fanaticism of wanting to see something and like being presented with it, and how it kind of resembles the sort of things you would expect to see in the deep sea. But it's very atmospheric as well, though, just for that basic setup that you can, as you said, just go in a few directions. And like, it's at first it feels like it's going to be very daunting when they say, oh yeah, you've got to, the way back is this in this direction. Think, oh god, am I going to have like 360 control? I'll get lost out here surely. But no, it's like very simple. But just that looming sort of darkness in front of you is quite intimidating, because you do expect to see something come out of there at one point or another. But usually the way it's handled is quite interesting, in that it isn't done for jump scare's sake. It's more that it is that looming sense of something, and it just emerges in most cases. Like even when the fish sort of show up, it's like we're there sort of thing, and then you're kind of taken aback for a second. And with the sort of very clunky controls, it means, as you said, you do end up missing out on the fish occasionally. And while you can go back and replenish your nets, it's like you get 3 in a row. So the amount of times I spaff 2 or in a row, just trying to catch something. And the sifting thing is like very sort of it gets a bit tedious at times,
Mm.
but you persevere because you want to sort of see what's next. What
Right.
will his discoveries find? You know, what will
Mm.
what will we learn about this world that he's got in mind? And yeah, I think that and the general sort of scuzzy lo-fi aesthetic of it all, like the lack of colors,
Mm.
in the especially in the underwater stuff, and in like the submersible. Yeah, it's lovely, simple setup, but yeah, it's striking because it obviously makes the most of each little bit it has. Yeah, but yeah, definitely, as I said, the story is the thing worth persevering for,
Mm.
and the imagery that it does bring up. But yeah, it's like yeah, the deliberately clunky style is definitely a bit testing occasionally, I'd say.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's a great point you make about the color palette here. It is fairly limited, but at the same time, it has this almost like 80s aesthetic to it, because of the fact that it like utilizes. I'm just thinking about when you're underwater, like your hands are glowing like neon
Yeah,
purple, and then the sort of perimeter of the player's viewpoint has this like neon blue trim to it, and all the things you can interact with are basically, utilizing these neon colors. But then everything else is black to be again, represent the sort of deep nature of the deep sea. So I just think that like overall, like that presentation has a really cool way of communicating something that if you were to describe it, it sounds fairly routine, but doing so through that lens again just like creates a little bit more uncertainty about what you're seeing. And given that what the nature of what you're investigating and what the player comes to learn and find, that's quite a great visual primer, I think. And again, when you begin to encounter some denizens of the deep, furthermore, that color palette, I think, helps to kind of like bring the ominous, but at the same time, like, I don't know, like the wonderment behind them because of the discovery that you're making. And
yeah,
I forgot to mention in the intro, this is available on Steam, and it
yeah.
is completely free. But
Mm,
with most games that are free, highly recommend if you've enjoyed the game, you can buy DLC pack, which is basically the Water Womb World soundtrack, which again, like the soundtrack is great, does a good
yeah,
job of establishing that atmosphere and the sort of like unease, but also having a little bit of that wonderment to it. The fact that you are, finding answers that initially present horrifying, but the more you get to know this protagonist, you realize like, oh, this is what they have been working towards. So even if the player themselves might be horrified,
mhm.
the protagonists and their discoveries are actually like this weird merger of elation and horror, which is always a really uncomfortable emotion to experience, but it's a memorable one nonetheless.
Yeah. I do like a little tinge of religious horror with
Mm,
the classic horror. It's like even more interesting.
yeah.
So that is our first pick. We will be back with our second pick right after this. Welcome back. For my pick, I need kelp, and there's no limit to the depths I'll go to get it. I just didn't think there would be consequences like this. Vitreous from Hyphenet, which this game is free on itch.io, is a very, very short horror game about a person diving into the sea, swimming through a kelp forest, and discovering something otherworldly. That's very much all I can say without spoiling it, because this game is literally about 3 minutes tops.
Yeah.
Like if you play it twice, I think you can play. There's like a couple of endings with it, but
Mhm.
it is a striking use of those few minutes. Um, Kind of interesting how we got similar games to some degree in terms of like just like going finding something in the sea, in the deep
Yeah.
sea. Um, but yeah, this is definitely going more in the cosmic horror sort of vibe of things, and like it's really impactful in its last few minutes, which is like the ending or the endings, if you will, which are both basically the same but different texts. And
Mm.
again, I can't spoil much about this. I mean, but yeah, it is a really interesting way to go about aquatic horror, where it's like the usual things you would think of aren't really the threat that you think they're going to be.
Mm.
Um, Most of the action is, when you do play it, is like very basic. We're talking like 1980s computers, sort of little pixels swimming about in this very simple ocean thing. But it's when you get like the greater detail that it really starts to, in certain scenes and certain things, that even though the character animation is quite limited, it's like the stuff going on around it is much more detailed. And with this sort of limited pixel art look, it does conjure up some really striking imagery. I was quite impressed with it in that thing. Yeah, very surreal. I think someone in the comments for this one sort of mentioned it's very Junji Ito, and I very much agree, especially in that it is quite short and has this like, what the fuck, where did that come from conclusion. Even though, like, I'll say this, the answer is very obvious if you look at the page, but the outcome is not, in terms of that. So yeah, it's, like I said, not too much more I can say about this. I probably talked longer about the game now than the game actually is. But yeah, I enjoyed it for what it was. How about you?
Yeah, I'm kind of a sucker not only for aquatic horror, but for again, like games that utilize an older sort of graphical style, right? This looks like something you'd find on the original or maybe the Game Boy Color, right? And so utilizing that retro look for a game and yet designing it with the sensibilities that, developers have nowadays is one of my favorite kind of like cross-sectionalities of interests, I suppose. And it creates things that have a, more modern artistic influence, if you will, Junji Ito being a great example of that for this game. And, I'm also just like love short games. It's one of those things where it's like, as people will be aware from this week's main feed Safe Room episode, like several of those games I spent more than a handful of hours, some of them tens of hours. And it's one of those things where, like, for Horror Bytes, I love finding these really short experiences, something like this that I could play 2 or 3 times in less than 15 minutes and get multiple endings and whatnot and explore various aspects of this art style that are quite impactful. But once you experience it and what its intentions were, the experience wraps up fairly quickly. Like, that's one of those things that I love because while this is a very short experience, it's one that I will remember for its utilization of that graphical style, like I was saying. And I think that, its use of a color palette as well, as limited as it is quite evocative at kind of like highlighting the aspects of aquatic horror that I love, which is, the unknown, the fantastical, but also the ominous nature of something and the sort of like unknowingness of what maybe wants to kill you or consume you at the bottom of the ocean. So yeah, this was again like a short but a sweet pick, as we like to say.
Yeah, and this is, as I said, from Hyphenet, a developer that's been around for quite some time. This game itself is from about 2018, and they said on their page they've helped out with the Dread X collections, and they helped found the Haunted PS1 collections around the same time this came out as well. And yeah, it's really cool to see like that storied, a developer cycle. We've seen quite a few over the years. We've done this, sort of build up their catalog and like start to really show their personality. But to have gone this long and all these great little experiments and stuff. Yeah, I'm quite impressed. I think their earliest game is like on there is like 2015 or something. So
wow.
Yeah, going for about 11 years of doing all sorts of different things and having that kind of impact as well with stuff like the Haunted PS1 stuff. Yeah, fantastic. And it was a nice discovery after the fact, I found with that as well. But yeah, that will do it, I think, for this week. You can find links to this episode's games in the description. But yes, thank you again, Jay, for talking about short horror games with me. And of course, if you, the listener, have a short horror game demo, game jam entry, or a proof of concept that you think we should be highlighting, or maybe you just wish to suggest a theme for the future, Jay here will show you how.
Yeah, people can always reach out to us via email, saferoompod@gmail.com, and on all social media platforms, it is also at saferoompod. So be sure to check us out on your preferred podcast platform, and of course your preferred social media platforms for updates on the show and games we're going to cover in the future, or maybe even games you think we should cover in the future. So feel free to follow us and reach us at those various social sites.
So we're plunging into the depths again with 2 more small-scale horror games in 2 weeks.
Watch The Toxic Avenger now on Screambox. The radioactive superhero that's certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes is available to watch now from the comfort of your home. Bloody FM listeners get a special introductory offer by going to bit.ly/ToxyFM. That's bit.ly/ToxieFM for a special offer on Screambox.
Sometimes you gotta do something.